It's the communal experience of that too. Sharing kind of anonymity in a dark room with a bunch of strangers and kind of all sharing a feeling. It's very personal and private, but shared at the same time.
This is the Box Office Podcast. I'm Daniel Loria, the editorial director of Box Office Pro, the pulse of theatrical exhibition. And this week we are joined by writer-director Derek Cianfrance speaking about his new film, Roofman, starring Channing Tatum and Kirsten Dunst, that is coming out to a theater near you this weekend. Derek and I talk all about the movie, some of his prior films, and the impact that the University of Colorado's film department had on him. A bit of a shameless plug there. As an alum of the program myself, we geek out on some of the campus memories we had from back in film school. And here, once again, joining us on the panel, we've got Chad Kennerk and Rebecca Pahle from Box Office Pro to talk about all the news from the world of theatrical exhibition this week. We are not in Los Angeles for the Fall Summit because we are not invited. Closed off the press, or at least this press is not invited to attend. I get it. Closed door sessions, important for exhibitors. Guys, it's been a rough ride so far in the last couple of weeks here in the box office.
Yeah, Taylor Swift didn't save us this time around.
No, I think Taylor Swift was fine. I think she did what she had to do. It was more The Rock really couldn't come through with a box office win. Benny Safdie's The Smashing Machine opening to an underwhelming $6 million, probably alongside Coco Nada's A Big, Bold, Beautiful Journey, which itself opened to only $3 million. I think two loud disappointments in terms of, I don't know if we can call Benny Safdie an art house director. He definitely has his roots in the art house world.
I think an A24 Safdie movie.
That's mainstream now. It's weird to say that, but it is.
And the reviews have started coming out for the other Safdie, Marty Supreme, that's coming out Christmas, which is supposed to be good. So
great reaction at the New York Film Festival's surprise screening last night. I didn't attend that, but I've heard great things from Josh Safdie's Marty Supreme. Another sports movie coming out, like you mentioned, from A24 in Christmas. Unfortunately, as we discussed, Smashing Machine really didn't pull its weight at the box office. And all I have to say about that is, thank God we had that Taylor Swift thing from AMC. Because if we didn't have that $34 million opening weekend, it might have been the worst weekend of the year without that help. Chad, what are some of the specific breakdown of the numbers from that opening weekend worldwide?
Friday came in at 15.8, Saturday 9.9, and Sunday 8.3. So just over 34 million altogether. A+ cinema score. So Taylor Swift fans were pleased with the showing.
Daniel, as our resident Swiftie, what have you been hearing about this event? Or I assume you didn't go because you have a young child. So
I didn't go. My kid's too young. My neighbors who have two young girls who are older than my own toddler, they went over at one of the showcase locations up here in Westchester, and they had a great time with it. I mean, I think everybody came into it knowing that it wasn't going to be a concert film, and it was a cool communal experience for people that wanted to check out the album with other folks. So I think it was fine. I mean, Chad, from those numbers, I mean, domestically, it was a good start. Internationally, how did it look?
Open to 16 million across 54 territories. It was number one in Australia, New Zealand, UK and Ireland, and Mexico. So altogether, it finishes its one weekend run with more than 50 million globally.
Oh, good. That's solid. I think that makes sense for an event cinema type release. And we talk about that impact at the box office. We didn't expect Smashing Machine to open at 6. We were expecting something closer to, I don't know, the low teens, something like that, $13, $14 million. It did less than half than that, unfortunately. I hope it'll find its audience coming closer to award season. But without that $34 million from Taylor Swift, we would have hit the lowest weekend of 2025 by far. So it was an $82 million, give or take, weekend in this past frame. And before this one, the lowest one in the calendar was the March 14 to 16 frame that only made $52 million. So, those $34 million helped us avoid a negative record for the year. But, we're still not where we want to be as an industry. A very disappointing ending to Q3. Q4 not off to a great start. There is a chance we can rally. I've been speaking to folks in our forecasting panel. A number of them still think 9.2 billion is realistic for this year. If you were to ask me, I think anywhere between 9 to 9.1 makes a little bit more sense. But yeah, I think when we started the year, we were thinking anywhere between 9.3 to 9.6. Obviously, we're downgrading those projections coming into the home stretch here.
Yeah, at least there are, I think, 4 movies in wide release this weekend. It's a bunch of options, whereas this past weekend, just pretty much the 2 new ones.
Yeah, we've got opening up this weekend, Kiss of the Spider-Woman, theatrical adaptation starring Jennifer Lopez that is probably going to open at the bottom of the 4 new releases, currently tracking between $1 to $3 million. Then we've got the faith-based film from Sony's Affirm division, Soul on Fire, tracking to $2 to $4 million. And then more on a mid-range level, we're expecting Roofman from Paramount Pictures to have a soft opening weekend, I think, in the high single digits. That's where films like this have been tracking. And then finally, Tron 3 is opening this weekend with the lead singer from 30 Seconds from Mars. That's currently tracking between $40 and $48 million opening weekend. So that's going to be a solid, I think, bump. But still, all in all, we're not looking at $100 million plus weekend in the domestic marketplace. And we can't wait for October to start, so things start getting a little bit better. I think that starts with this weekend's pre-sales of Wicked for Good. And yes, that is an early pre-sale period, but I'm excited to watch it. Chad, you've been interviewing like numerous below-the-line production staff from that film for our upcoming November issue.
Yeah, they're getting me even more excited to see it. Some of them have seen either the initial assembly cut or rough cut. Obviously, the editor has been working on this and just wrapped it recently, posted on social media that they are officially wrapped on Wicked for Good. And yeah, I can't wait to see it.
That's great that the pre-sales period is so long. It's something that exhibitors have definitely been saying for a long time that they want more of. Just a little bit of a boost to help them get those numbers up. I think, was it the Nolan Odysseus that went pre-sale like
a year in advance?
Yeah, is that the earliest we've ever gone? Or
I think that was a smart PR ploy. If I understand correctly, that went up for sale on the IMAX 70 millimeter screenings, which is like 12 auditoriums tops in North America. And of course, it sold out in like 3 hours. Those things always sell out in 3 hours. You could tell anything 3 years ahead of time. A 70 millimeter IMAX is going to go in the first 3 hours of being available. But no, on the Wicked side, Chad's not alone in being super excited for this title, guys. I mean, there's a really good chance that this is the one movie in terms of calendar year grosses, because Avatar's coming out in mid-December. But in calendar year grosses, there's a good chance this beats Minecraft movie for the top grossing movie of the year. I think that's the level of anticipation for this title. And we know from last year, we had all those marketing tie-ins. You had like muffins, Starbucks cups. I can't wait for that to get restarted, because I think that really activates a good part of the general community beyond those core fans like Chad is. And a super early opening weekend forecast for Wicked for Good. Right now, we are looking at an opening weekend between $120 to $150 million. We'll know a lot more once there's an entire week of pre-sales already in the bank. But that's the starting point. That's the baseline. Expect those numbers to go up, to go down in the coming weeks as we get closer to that opening weekend. Definitely not something to get excited about. More like a concern is what's going on over in the world of AI. I think a lot of studio executives wondering what the point of IP law is if people can just go in and break it. Rebecca, the MPA put out a statement recently. What's going on here?
Yeah, so OpenAI recently put out their Sora 2 model for video generation. Immediately upon it being released, videos started popping up with characters like SpongeBob and King of the Hill and those licensed characters doing things that were definitely not licensed for them by the copyright holders.
I saw Tony Montana do a TED Talk on Instagram. That's probably part of this barrage of AI. Let's just steal everything and put it out into the world. Unless that's a cool deleted scene that De Palma shot at some point.
The CEO, I think he called it interactive fan fiction, which the whole point of fan fiction is that, like, he's getting paid. There can't be any money that, anyway.
No, this doesn't work. This is like so blatantly illegal that it's just unabashed at this point. I'm glad the MPA is coming out, hard after this.
They're pressing them on that, saying that while OpenAI has clarified it will soon offer rights holders more control over character generation, they must acknowledge it remains their responsibility, not rights holders, to prevent infringement on the Sora 2 service. OpenAI needs to take immediate and decisive action to address this issue. Well-established copyright law safeguards the rights of creators and applies here. When's it's copyright law as relates to entertainment? When's Disney going to chime in? Because that's the boss level. Yeah.
That is the final boss of copyright law. I mean, I'm glad the MPA is getting involved because it is a little ridiculous when we start seeing just outright theft and IP theft happening at this level. So we'll wait to see how this AI thing is resolved here in the industry. I've yet to see a serious business application for AI in the film industry. I know that our friends over at View International are using it for programming. I think that's probably the most relevant piece of it.
The data-oriented stuff, not so much the creative.
I know our friends at Vista, the POS companies, are also working with it, integrating it into Movio and their Vista Cloud. You hear
the
about
video
it.
and image generation thing, that feels just like a completely different.
When it starts becoming the creative side of it, yeah.
Yeah, I think was there the end credits of One Battle After Another had this film did not do with any AI, I think.
I would support that for more films in the future. I think people might want to know about that moving forward. Something that Phil Clapp mentioned, the head of the UK Cinema Association, that he's hearing from audiences here and there that having a designation of whether AI was used for a feature film or not is interesting. It's still early days to see where this ends up. We will be tracking this trend along with everything else over on our website, boxofficepro.com. And now we're moving on to the feature segment in this week's episode, my conversation with writer-director Derek Cianfrance on his upcoming film, Roofman, coming up this weekend from Paramount Pictures. That's coming up after the break.
Imagine a world where your cinema's digital experience is as unforgettable as the movies you show. At Box Office, we strive to make that world a reality. We offer innovative solutions like custom-built websites, mobile apps, and user-friendly ticketing pages, crafted to meet the unique needs of cinemas. It's all about enhancing customer loyalty and making booking a breeze. Take your cinema's online experience to the next level with Boost. Contact us today at sales@boxoffice.com to learn more.
Derek, you have a very varied career with the sort of movies you make. You usually inject a good part of yourself into some of these roles, some of these films. Roofman is based on a true story, if I understand correctly. So tell me a little bit about the project. One, how did you find out about it? Two, what drew you into a film like this?
I had finished my HBO series, I Know This Much Is True. And when I had finished that, I kind of had fully expressed what I had been trying to express for like the last dozen years. Every movie I had made was kind of about ancestry, inheritance, sins being passed on through generations, legacy. And I felt like after I made I Know This Much Is True, I felt finally it had been exorcised from me. And I was really looking for something that I grew up in Colorado. I grew up as like a kid, loved going to the video store. I just watched movies my whole, childhood. And I was kind of excited to make a movie that felt like those movies that I used to love that made me fall in love with movies in the first place. And I was searching for something. And I heard this story about Jeffrey Manchester, about this guy who had robbed 45 McDonald's, had sentenced to 45 years in prison, who had broken out of prison and who had hid in a toy store for 6 months. And I thought to myself, well, that's a world that I kind of know because I grew up in the suburbs of Denver and I used to work at a Walmart for a couple of years. I was like the fastest checker in the history of all Colorado Walmarts. I was also the menswear employee of the month, 1 month. So like I grew up in this kind of big box store world and fast food world. And I felt like I could make a movie. I don't often see that in movies. And if you do, you kind of see it kind of torn apart or judged or something. And I just felt like maybe I could make a movie that took place in that world. So I started talking to Jeff. Now, Jeff is in a maximum security prison in Raleigh, North Carolina. So I couldn't call him. So he has to call me. And he started calling me. I got my number to him and he started calling me. And I talked to him about 4 times a week for the next 4 years. And bit by bit, he just told me his story. He called me Dr. Derek.
How do you even start that conversation? Do you send him like a Blue Valentine DVD and tell him like, hey, when you get a chance, hit me up?
Jeff has not seen my movies. He has not seen my movies. He's heard about them, but he hasn't seen them. I don't think they're playing Blue Valentine in D Block. But I had a producer who got in contact with him and said, would you call this person? Because he's in a situation where he can't receive calls. He's in a situation where, one of the questions I asked Jeff one time is I said, what do you miss most about life on the outside? And he said, an apple. And I said, you don't get to eat apples? He says, I haven't had an apple in 20 years because one prisoner at one time had made apple wine. And so the warden said, no more apples in prison. So anyway, so he's really locked down. And he got my number. He called me and we just started a conversation. I started to get to know him. And he's a very interesting storyteller. As he was living his life, I think he imagined that he was living in a movie. Mm-hmm. One of the things we shared in common was kind of the love of movies that we both grew up with, the movies that we watched like from the 80s and 90s. And I think he was kind of hyper aware that he was the star of his own movie when he was doing all these crazy things. And so, he was very open. And, after about a year or so of talking to him, I got in contact with everyone in his life that would talk to me. I tried to talk to, everyone that would. I talked to his mother, his stepfather, his brother. I talked to Lee, who was the woman who he kind of had a relationship with while he was hiding inside the Toys R Us walls. Talked to the pastor of the church that he went to. I talked to the police sergeant that arrested him. I talked to a lot of correctional officers. Talked to the guy that drove the prison truck that got him out of there, that he hid under to escape prison. I talked to basically anyone and everyone that would talk to me in his story. And from all of that information, I felt like a detective in a way, like kind of an emotional cinematic detective trying to pick all these pieces together to try to tell the most cinematic truth about Jeff's story. And that's how I came up with Roofman. And I related to a lot of aspects of it too. And I think Channing, eventually when I sent the script to Channing kind of infused himself in it. I think Channing will always say that the person on the screen, Jeff Manchester on the screen, is kind of an amalgamation of the real Jeff, of Channing, and of myself. And, we all put our truths into that character and try to imagine what this kind of insane story was, try to make the kind of a fun movie, but an honest and emotional movie about this experience.
Well, tell me about casting Channing, because obviously the way you've casted your male leads before has come in not by coincidence. There seems to be a lot of planning and thinking on who the right person is for the role. And I think the same thing goes for Kirsten Dunst's role in this film, right?
Yeah, for sure. I had met Channing back in 2006. I had seen Guide to Recognizing Your Saints. Mm-hmm. And I thought that, wow, he was like Brando in that movie. I was like, this guy is incredible. And I had been writing Blue Valentine at that point and had been really struggling to cast the movie. And so I got Channing the script and I met him at a party for Guide to Recognizing Your Saints. And he said, I really liked your script. He was like, but I just don't know who this guy is. And so he passed on it. I've met him 17 years later. I met him as I was writing Roofman, and I was thinking about him as a possibility for this role. And I met him in Prospect Park. And the first thing I said to him is, I said, do you remember we met 17 years ago? And he said, I think about that all the time. And I was like, well, next time I offer you something, just say yes. Anyway, so we walked the park and just caught up. And I've always loved Channing. I think everything he's amazing in. I think in terms of his ability to kind of balance comedy and drama is like very special. I think he has an ability to connect to his emotional side, which is like he's extremely vulnerable person. And I don't think he always gets asked to do that in a movie. But I knew from seeing Guide to Recognizing Your Saints, or Foxcatcher, that he had that ability to do that as well and bring this kind of like humor and physicality to it. And, I thought that the story of a guy living alone in this toy store, it needed some physical comedy. And Channing, being a dancer, can really control his body in a way. With TV and everything, there's so much like actors are asked to just be talking heads, just be like dialogue delivery machines. And for this movie, there was a lot of silent filmmaking that needed to take place because it's a guy alone in a toy store. So I needed someone that was going to be able to command the screen with his physicality and with his movement and tell the story silently. And, we had this shared love of Buster Keaton, of course, who doesn't? And we talked a lot about Jerry Lewis, and we talked about Gene Kelly quite a bit. And we tried to bring all of these kind of like these ideas of these leading men who had extreme physical presences to our story. And when we were prepping to do it, he told me, he was like, I think Jeff should be very thin, right? Because I think he has to get into tight spaces. And so he like showed up on set like 70 pounds or 65 pounds, like lighter than when the last time I saw him. And so it was clear to me that he was like committing to this fully. And as a filmmaker, there's no better ally to have than him. He's like a defender of the movie and of the director's vision. And I can't imagine anyone else in the world playing him. And then Kirsten, I've always loved, grew up like just being in awe of her on the screen, from Interview with the Vampire, Virgin Suicides, Spider-Man, Bring It On, but then Melancholia is like one of the great all-time performances, I think. And I met her around that time, and we were talking about maybe doing Light Between Oceans together, but I thought that the accent thing was going to be too weird because we knew who she was. But anyway, I always kind of made a pact that we would work together someday. And I sent her this script, and she just immediately understood the heart of it. Because after spending like a year talking to Jeff, I didn't know what the tone or what the thesis on this film was going to be. And I met with the real Lee, who was Jeff's girlfriend. And I had a lot of assumptions about what that meeting was going to be and how she was going to feel about the real Jeff. I thought that she would obviously be betrayed, that she would be hard, that she would be mad at him. And when I talked to her for the first time, she had so much grace. She loved Jeff. She forgave him. She looked back at her time with Jeff as not a painful one, but one that was like one of her greatest times in her life. And I needed to find an actor who had that same kind of like grace and that same kind of ability to be like a good human being and forgive. And when I sent it to Kirsten, she just immediately related. I mean, Kirsten is like salt of the earth. She's like amazing because she's an acting machine who's like spent her whole life in front of the camera. And she's just the most real, true blue person that you could know. And she brought all that into this character. And I think her performances, it was just always true. Every take, every moment that she was on set, she was just my rock.
And of course,
I think when you see the movie, she is that too. She grounds the movie because you have this character, Jeff, who's just like flying all over the place. And she's our truth in the movie. It was one of the great experiences working with her.
And this movie has a third lead, which is your setting. And you mentioned that you have this background in being in this big box retail culture. And of course, anyone that was there in the 90s, and that was a different time, right? When we talk about retail, when we talk about these stores, it seemed like these spaces occupied a very important role in our lives. And that's really the sense that I get from the footage I've seen of Roofman, that this is a different era in these social spaces as we know them. Of course, there's spaces for retail, for commerce, but it meant something else in a suburban American setting. So tell me about getting that right and rebuilding something like that, because nostalgia alone can't get you there.
No, that's correct. I spent so many years as a documentary filmmaker. And so anytime I make a piece of fiction, even if it's based on a real story, I still have to go into it with like kind of a documentary approach. And part of that is I want my actors to be kind of thrown into this aquarium of real life. And so I made a choice early on to shoot down in Charlotte, North Carolina, which is where all the events happened. And I made that choice because I wanted to kind of chase the ghosts of the past. And I wanted to go down there because that's where all the people still live. That's where Lee lived. That's where Pastor Ron lived. That's where the real church was. That's where the real toy store was. And I thought if I went down there, the people who experienced the real story in real life could be a part of the movie and make the movie with us. Because my whole life I've been making home movies. Every movie I've ever, when I was a teenager, that's what I was making. My mom and dad and sister and grandma would be in my movies. And I wanted to go back and kind of find this place of home that Jeff had lived in with these people that made a home for him. So we went down to North Carolina. All the people who were in this real story, I offered to everyone who wanted to a role in the film. Sometimes they play themselves. Sometimes they play other characters. But when you see the movie, there's a million Easter eggs in the movie from the real people who were involved in the real story who make this film with us. So that was a truth I wanted to find. But then the other truth was like finding this toy store, this Toys R Us. Toys R Us went out of business like a number of years ago. And most of the existing Toys R Us in America have been turned into, like the old big box store versions of Toys R Us have been turned into Spirit Halloween stores or furniture stores or rug stores. The actual Toys R Us that Jeff hid out in is now like a mega church. I went to that church. Actually, the musical director of the church was the musical director of the band for our movie. So again, I was just always trying to take from let the choices that I would make in this movie just be born from the real people. And if they wanted to be a part of it, it was their movie. We actually shot in the real church though, where Jeff went to. So there was one Toys R Us store that was 20 minutes away from the Toys R Us where he stayed in. That was now a shell of a Toys R Us store. It was 40,000 square feet. It had no tiles anymore. It had no fluorescent lights anymore. And we went in there and rebuilt it basically from one tile at a time and repopulated it with all of the toys from the era. And it wasn't just like one toy in the front of the shelf. We had to have 3 toys deep, because what I wanted to do was have Channing and Kirsten and Peter Dinklage and Emery Cohen, or the cops who went into that store, to feel like it was actually the place. And I wanted Channing to be able to have an experience in that store where he could have the same experience that Jeff had. And I could make kind of a documentary on Channing Tatum's experience in a toy store. And it was funny. I had talked to Jeff a couple weeks ago, the real Jeff Manchester. He had seen the trailer, or he'd seen pieces of the trailer on the local news that was playing in prison. And he said, I have a question. He was like, I saw an image of Channing Tatum in his underwear with like a pool floaty around his waist and a teddy bear on his shoulders. And he was like, how did you guys come up with that? And I said, well, look, I was just in the toy store and, we were preparing a shot and Channing came around the corner wearing some Heelys and, looking like that. And he said, I'm really glad to hear that. He was like, because if you lock yourself in a toy store for 6 months, it brings out your inner child. And so what I like to do is, like, if I put an actor in a situation where they're immersed in this experience, all of a sudden life happens. And then my job as a filmmaker is to capture the life, to witness it. So anyway, Jeff was very, very excited that Channing could get back in touch with his inner child.
Just wait until he sees the one sheet, because that image kind of made it through, right?
Exactly.
Give the marketing department a heads up there. Oh, this is great to hear. And one of the things that you've been mentioning a number of times in this conversation is how important it is to see different type of movies, and basically your love for this medium in watching a number of different genres. Of course, we're both alums of the University of Colorado Film Program, where I was able to study under Phil Solomon. You got both Phil Solomon and Stan Brakhage during your time. And when we talk about discovering films and just new ways of thinking about cinema, I can't think of a better hub for that. And I did want to ask you about that. How did that sort of film education open these doors to you in looking at different genres and looking at modes like melodrama and playing with that and tweaking that? Because your films are a lot of things, but they aren't linear, not in tone, not in the way we usually think of genre. So yeah, how was that sort of education influential for you moving forward?
When I was a kid, I always wanted to be a filmmaker. The only other thing I ever wanted to be was a roller coaster designer. But couldn't quite see the future in that. So I loved the film school generation, Scorsese, Coppola, Lucas. I used to sleep with a picture of Scorsese above my bed when I was a kid, and I wanted to follow in their footsteps. But when it came time to, go to college, we just couldn't afford the tuition of NYU or USC. So I ended up going to my local school, which is CU, and remember first day in CU, they showed me Mothlight by Brackage, which was whatever 12-minute movie, which was all moth wings taped to the celluloid, and what you get is you saw it, I'm sure.
The first day as well. Danya
first day as well.
Just turns
right?
on the 8mm, and that's what you do, right?
There you go. Yes, and what it for me as a kid who grew up in the suburbs of in Lakewood, who went to the video store and only really knew narrative. I'd searched around and watched all the Kubrick films and, searched around as deep as I could get in my local video store. But when I went to CU and all of a sudden saw this experimentation and saw people playing with the plasticity of the medium and using the medium for other purposes rather than just narrative purposes, it just kind of blew my mind. And I felt like I was in the right place. And then I developed such strong bonds with my professors, with Phil Solomon, especially. He became kind of like my Jiminy Cricket in my life. And he was my cinematic conscience. And I guess going to that film school, I was able to just understand the possibilities of filmmaking and that it didn't always have to be strictly narrative. We never talked about budgets or receptions of movies. We just talked about film and filmmaking. And, I think it transformed, and the other thing that happened to me was I got to witness the life of an artist, because you had Phil Solomon and Stan Brakhage that were there. And I got to see Stan Brakhage, walk out of a coffee shop in the morning where he had been painting on film. And I got to spend countless hours in Phil's basement, at film symposiums, and I got to just witness what the life of an artist was and see how that went. And so it was that was a huge North Star for me on just how functional it could be and how regular life would look as an artist. And, and Phil, he passed away a few years ago, unfortunately. But he's still that Jiminy Cricket to me. My editor, Jim Helton, who also went to CU Boulder, we always talk about when we're watching cuts, Phil's voice will possess one of us and we'll talk about the movie. He's still his voice is has become so much a part of us. Oh, but here's the thing. I remember Phil and Stan, who were these extreme artists. They used to go see everything, right? Stan Brakhage especially would go to see every movie, and the most commercial movies to the most art house movies. And they just loved cinema and loved all kinds of cinema. And there was something just snobby about them. And I thought about those guys a lot. And I just thought about, Brakhage, when he was my film history professor, he used to accidentally leave the mic on sometimes in class. And I could hear him laughing. His laugh track would be on, or when he would be moved, you could hear it. And I was just thinking about his joy and his love of movies. And I thought with this movie that was back in 2020 during the pandemic, I was trying to think I want to just make a movie that was that reflected the love I had as a kid and just get me back into that. This is the kind of movie I would have been psyched to see when I was a teenager growing up in Colorado and falling in love with movies. And that had the ability to do anything. That could make you laugh, could make you cry, could, make you conflicted about whatever the characters' choices were. I don't know. Just maybe it's a bit of a roller coaster. This movie I think is kind of that.
Well, we need this type of movie, especially today in a film industry that's still recovering from COVID, that we need more of a variety of genres hitting our screens. This publication is the official publication of the Theater Owners Association here in the US. So a lot of our listeners, a lot of our readers are movie theater operators. And I wanted to ask you what that cinematic experience means to you. Were we talking about artists? And of course, there's no bigger canvas than the big screen. You've worked in film, you've worked in digital. What does this medium mean to you? And what does the movie theater experience represent for you as an artist?
It was just always my safe place. Movie theaters have been always just the place I feel most comfortable in. Maybe it's like sitting in the dark. It's a little bit about being a voyeur. It's the communal experience of that too. Sharing kind of anonymity in a dark room with a bunch of strangers and kind of all sharing a feeling. It's very personal and private, but shared at the same time. I don't know. I feel like now I get to go to movies with my kids, and it's just like it's like the best adventure going to a movie. And I feel like movies have always been like my friends, and some of my favorite movies feel like friends that I get to visit at different times in different places in my life. And obviously to see those movies in biggest screen possible in this kind of shared spiritual experience. That's what it's like. Church. It's like going to church. You can have your belief and your spirituality, and that's a very private, personal thing. But to go to a place with other people, all feeling it in their own way, different shared experiences, individual shared experiences. I love being a part of the audience. I love being in an audience.
Well, Derek, thanks so much for your time. When I see you next, I got to tell you the anecdotes I've heard about Brackage watching Chicken Run in the Boulder local theaters in the late.
Oh my goodness.
There's a lot of those stories. So when you mentioned that,
Yes.
like openness, there are many, many anecdotes from campus that you hear over the years.
There is a great video online of Phil and Brackage going to see Mark Pellington's Mothman Prophecies. And sitting in the theater, and then after the movie talking about it, because Phil used to record all of Brackage's so much of Brackage, all of his phone messages and everything. But yeah. No, the one thing I would say about Brackage, one last thing, I remember film history class with him. He had the projectionist. We were watching Ivan the Terrible Part 2, and he had the projectionist wrapped the projector completely out of focus, and we watched the whole movie out of focus, like severely out of focus, because he wanted us to see the collisions of shadow and light and how Eisenstein used montage to like collide. And I'll never forget it. I mean, I love that movie. I've seen it numerous times since, and I love the narrative of that movie. But the fact that he could deconstruct it into its formal elements was eye-opening.
And a big thanks to Derek Cianfrance, the writer-director of Roofman, coming out in wide release this Friday from Paramount Pictures. Earlier you heard from my colleagues, Chad Kennerk and Rebecca Pahle. And the Box Office Podcast will be back once again next Thursday with a new episode. So don't forget to rate, subscribe, and tell people to listen to the show. We'll talk to you again next week.